Hello explorers, thanks for joining us again and welcome back to another exciting and informative video on our YouTube channel. If you are joining us for the first time, we want to thank you for watching. In this episode, I will be looking at the United States of America's African policy ADRIFT, why the US at the moment is watching events really close in the continent of Africa, looking at Niger. I would explore this like you've never before seen. I would dive into specifics, bring to you historical information, geopolitics in the region as the reason why US African policy is adrift at the moment. So without any much delay, let's just dive straight into it. The recent coup in Niger has underlined the United States of America's policy gaps in Africa. Despite aid and counter-terrorism effort, Chinese and Russian influence are growing. If you look at the geopolitics position in the region, the events in Niger highlights the ineffectiveness of the United States policy in Africa, since the US has limited interest on the continent. However, those setbacks are unlikely to significantly affect actions from Washington. With impending national elections, the administration will neither be interested in accepting additional risk or undertaking new measures and other commitments. The US strategy will be to muddle through in the near term. If you look at views from Washington, why the US has no vital interest in Africa, Washington does consider engagement on the continent important. Since the September 2001 terrorist attack on the United States soil, the US had paid particular attention to supporting counter-terrorism efforts and also aiding efforts to combat violent extremism. As of 2007, the US government established African Command, the AFRICOM, in Germany as a regional headquarters to oversee US military forces and regional military assistance. The primary focus of AFRICOM has been to build local capacity to counter-arm Islamist groups within the region. In addition, the US has always sought to play an active role in humanitarian assistance, economic development, and also improving the capacity and quality of governance. For instance, establishing in 2003 the US President's emergency plan for the continent of Africa has disbursed over $100 billion characterized by trade and investment rather than development assistance on loans. Instead of broad agendas, Washington relies on specific programs like the 2000 African Growth and Opportunity Act and the 2003 President's Emergency Plan for Aid and Relief of 2013, looking at the Power African Initiative, or most recently, Prosper African Initiative designed by the Trump administration at the time. The new strategy reaffirmed declarations from the 2017 when the National Security Strategy named China and Russia as actors attempting to erode American security and prosperity within the continent of Africa. The document states that the US rivalry are employing non-military tools to advance their influence and interest on the African continent. The United States strategy for African countries has become much more comprehensive and now includes 4 far-reaching goals. The first is fostering openness and open society in accordance with international liberal world order led by the US. The second is to deliver democratic and security dividends based on the idea that democracy is exportable through positive inducement and punitive measures such as sanctions. The third is to advance pandemic recovery and economic opportunity. Finally, the fourth targets is support conservative climate adoption and also energy transition. In this particular ambitious goal, several factors will be critical in shaping US relations with African countries. Much depends on the future of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, set to expire in 2025. Africa accounts for only 1% of US foreign trade. The European Union and China trade much more with the continent of Africa than any other continent. To compete with these rivalries and contribute to prosperity across the continent, the United States will have to design a more effective consensual trade framework at a time of rising protectionism. Given that so many African countries face unsustainable debt levels, engagement with the region will also depend on the capacity of external factors. Financial institutions, but also key lenders like China, will play an important role through debt readjustments and forgiveness. Beijing could also attempt to turn this leverage into a competitive advantage, reducing American influence. The war in Ukraine is also expected to affect the United States' relationship with Africa in the short to medium term. Both Washington and Brussels would like African countries to unequivocally condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but the recent backlash against Western presence on the continent suggests that such an alignment will be difficult to secure. Moving ahead, over the last decade, the US has become increasingly concerned about the growing malicious influence of Russia and Chinese activity on the continent. Russian mercenaries, the Wagner Group. China is aggressively expanding its presence in several African countries. The US is concerned about the destabilizing impact of Chinese activity, including exacerbating debts. In addition, the US has national security concerns, such as Chinese effort to establish a naval presence in the Atlantic coast of Africa, including in Equatorial Guinea and Namibia. Moving forward, if you consider strategy of the Biden administration at the moment, Africa receives superficial treatment in the United States circles, national security strategy, and published last year. Most recently, if you look at information, the administration also released a strategy for sub-Saharan Africa. Both are layered with domestic political objectives, such as elevating the priority of the climate change policy. Washington also issued a revised strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability, adding a 10-year strategic plan for West Africa, plus Haiti, Libya, Mozambique, and also Papua New Guinea in March of 2023 to create counterterrorism partnership with applicability to Niger and broader Sahel security. If you look at the geopolitics in the region, the strategies are formulated vague and has little regards to the significant regional differences on the continent. While they support encouraging private sector investment and cooperative action with allies in Europe, the Middle East, and also Indo-Pacific, there are no specific policy implementation, new views. The document emphasizes partnering but not little to address issues of governance that limits the effectiveness of many regional powers. If you look at that, in practice, US foreign policy mimics other strategic priorities, the green agenda, and social policies such as abortion and gender, while have little positive impact in the continent of Africa. If you look at Americans' activities on the ground as the US develop its strategy in the region, as the development in Niger illustrates, US measures in Africa are underperforming despite having a significant presence in the country. For instance, in Niger, Washington had no situational awareness that predicted the events. In fact, only months ago, the United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken called Niger a model of resilience, a model of democracy, a model of cooperation. In his own words, this was 7th coup in Africa since 2020. If you look at that particular event in that area. Furthermore, despite massive US counter-terrorism aid, according to recent independent study based on our analytical research, extremist activities in Africa has mushroomed over the last 6 months. 18% of the violence in the Sahel, where Niger is located at the moment, if you look at different areas in the region. Meanwhile, the US aid continues to marginally affect economic development and also advancement of societal issues. According to recent report from the United Nations, economic growth of Africa is estimated to weaken to 3.8% in 2023 from 4.1% in 2022 due to subdued investment and also failing export. Irregular migration remains a significant and also an endemic challenge, particularly from West to North Africa. Hunger in North Africa is at crisis level, affecting over 36 million people. Looking at records, the Biden administration had no significant success in countering Chinese or Russian influence. China's presence in Africa is extensive. According to research by the US House Committee on Foreign Affairs, China is now Africa's biggest trading partner, with Sino-African trade toppling over 200 billion per year. Over 10,000 Chinese firms are currently operating throughout the African continent. China's economic presence in Africa is 4 times greater than that of the United States of America. In addition to seeking resource export markets and also political and diplomatic influence, Beijing is providing arms to African nations, increasingly offering the professional military education. With a military base in Djibouti, it's also seeking other base options on the continent of Africa. Moving ahead, Russia has long significant influence in Libya, and primarily through the Wagner Group group has an active presence in several countries in the region. Recently, Moscow had tried to leverage this influence with several countries, including South Africa, to marshal support for its war against Ukraine. If you look at the humanitarian development complex with regards to the continent of Africa, looking at the United States focus, U.S. assistance to Africa is significant so far. In 2022, for example, U.S. aid disbursed over $6 billion in assistance. Most U.S. assistance and programs are funneled through contracts with international non-governmental organizations, NGOs. Many, as matter of principle, refrain from coordinating their activities with national interests. Maintain that neutrality is an essential operation practice, and also that to insist on working autonomously from indigenous and foreign governments. In addition, the NGOs prioritize their mission and gender in their work. There has been scant, if any, efforts to reform assistance delivery to deliver better performance and outcome. If you look at global partners with regards to U.S. position with zooming to the continent of Africa, the United States of America does have like-minded friends and allies who shared an interest in countering destabilizing influence in Africa. In 2022, Washington hosted the U.S. African Leadership Summit. In 2023, participated in the U.S. African Business Leadership Summit in Botswana. Yet, the real U.S. strength in Africa is with the key strategic relevance, bilateral relations such as Egypt, Morocco, Kenya, Ghana, and also Nigeria. Several U.S. allies in the Middle East have a strong presence in influence in the region, including Israel, Turkey, and also the United Arab Emirates. If you look at Europe, the European Union and some European nations place particular emphasis on African regional policies. France has suffered significant reverse in its influence, particularly in Mali and Niger. Indo-Pacific partners and allies also have a significant footprint and influence in Africa, particularly India and Japan, looking at also India's presence in the region. India, for example, recently sought to bolster its role in Africa, proposing that the African Union be admitted as a member of G20. Both India and Japan are focused on countering Chinese influence on the continent of Africa. The US, however, has no effective integrated mechanism to coordinate its action with other powers seeking to stable and also prosperous Africa at the moment. If you look at other areas, the recent events in Niger are unlikely to serve as a wake-up call for the Biden administration team. The administration's hope is that the junta collapse and Niger moves out of news cycle. Further, while the US will likely to work more closely with friendly country members of the international community often have conflict interests. France and Italy, for example, have contradictory approaches to dealing with illegal migration from Africa. The administration is content to continue with the African strategy that largely reflects its domestic political agenda, a course pleasing to its political support. In the long term, the policy is likely unsustainable given the challenges posed, particularly by China and the dramatic demographic growth predicted in Africa in the years ahead. A future administration, regardless of which party trumps in the 2024 national elections, will have to adopt a more collaborative effort with friends and allies, since separately none have significant weight and influence to significantly impact future development in the region in the continent of Africa. US policy will likely shift from counter-terrorism and also climate change to economic and diplomatic engagement. In any scenario, health policy will be an important component of US policy, though emphasis will likely differ from the Republicans and also Democrats if you consider those particular events in the region. Hopefully, we've informed you regards to the US presence in the region and why the US African policy is adrift at the moment. Hopefully, the events in the region will translate into positive impact and why Africa at the moment is experiencing an important geopolitical shift. We want to thank you for watching. We're looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.